Well, good morning everyone. This is Brian Robson, the Executive Clinical Director here at Healthcare Improvement Scotland. I'd like to welcome you to the first of a series of QI Connect webinars for 2014. This series of webinars has been brought together by Healthcare Improvement Scotland, primarily at the request of our national clinical leads who work with us across a number of our safety and improvement programs across Scotland to help them connect with international leaders in quality and safety, and to offer them an opportunity to ask questions of those international leaders about key topics and areas of interest. I'm going to hand you over just now to Lisa Birch, who's our WebEx coordinator here at Healthcare Improvement Scotland, and she's going to help you get the most out of this WebEx call, and then I'll introduce you to our first speaker.
Morning everyone. I just want to run through a couple of housekeeping slides to get us going and to introduce you to WebEx if you've not used it before. If I could ask you to not have any side conversations throughout the presentation. Most of your lines will be muted anyway. If you have anything to discuss throughout the presentation or any questions you want to ask, please use the chat box that you'll see on the right hand side. I'll run through this in a couple of seconds as to how to use that. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end of Mike's presentation where you can get an opportunity to pose any questions to Mike. And if you have any technical difficulties logging in or any trouble hearing the session, please use the phone number that you see on screen or chat with the host to get any technical support. Okay, so what you'll see on screen at the moment, to give you an idea, is on the right hand side you'll see a list of participants. That's everyone who's joining the call today. Beneath that, you'll see circled in red on the screen is the chat function. Like I say, please use that to discuss things throughout the presentation. If you've got anything that you want to add to Mike's presentation, or if you have any questions that you want to ask, please feel free to do it there. I would caution, however, that it automatically sends to all participants, so just make sure that if you're wanting to ask a particular question of the host, that you make sure that you select the host from the drop-down box. Okay, so before we start off, and before I kick back to Brian, if I could ask you to click on the arrow that you see on the left-hand side of the screen, the wee blue arrow, and that will allow us to identify where it is that you're calling in from. So if I could ask you if you could click on the screen where it is that you're joining us from. And apologies if you're joining us from out with Europe. I see we have Martin from Norway. Welcome.
So it's Brian here. It's so good to see so many arrows appearing on the screen. We have somewhere between 80 and 100 people on the call at the moment, and we're looking at a total figure of somewhere between 130 and 180 people joining the call from various rooms across the country and further afield. But it is good to see Martin from Oslo, I think, on the call. And please feel free to chat in to the chat box about anything that is taking your interest in the call, or additional information you might want to share with other participants. Over to you, Lisa. Okay, thanks everyone for that. I'll pass over to Brian to introduce Michael today, who's our speaker from Tasmania. Thank you very much indeed. We were absolutely delighted when we went to a number of friends across the world to ask them to speak with us here in Scotland. And one of the very first to come back was Professor Michael Buist. I've known Michael now for almost 10 years, and I've been very touched and impressed with his thoughtfulness in the area of quality improvement and safety, and his powerful ability to tell both personal and organisational stories. Mike is now the Director of Intensive Care at the North West Regional Hospital in Burnley, Tasmania. He'll describe that a little bit more to you. and also Professor of Health Services at the School of Medicine in the University of Tasmania. And when we asked Mike to join this series, we said we wanted something to really kick it off with a bang and knock our socks off. So he gave us the title, Why is it that doctors don't get the quality and safety agenda? So he lived up to my expectations of starting us with a bang. So from all the way from Tasmania, welcome to you, Mike.
Thanks, Brian.
And I'm going to hand over to you, Mike. You've got a full audience here from Scotland, from Norway, from Denmark, and further afield. And we're keen to hear a little bit about your experiences of getting doctors and others involved in the quality and safety agenda. For those on the call, please chat your questions into the question box. We'll be keeping an eye on them. We also, when it comes to the questions, and I will read out your questions to Mike when we come to the question and answer session. But we're also delighted to have Julie Hanna, one of the current Scottish Patient Safety Fellows, joining us on the call, and Julie will be leading off the question and answer session after Mike's talk. So over to you, Mike.
First slide, thanks, Lisa. Okay, look, I've been in the healthcare game as a clinician, and I want to talk to everyone from the trenches. And the key, I'll come straight to the key message, which is that I don't think the people that run healthcare understand the core business of the clinical interface, which is the delivery of the healthcare to the patients. And this first slide, it's from one of the large intensive care units where I was a director in Melbourne, sort of says it all. We've got a multitude of people attending a multidisciplinary ward round. We've got people from different cultural backgrounds. The two registrars there, one's from Manchester, one's from the Middle East. One's come to Australia from the Middle East, having worked as a professor in his previous place. And he struggled a lot with a lot of the cultural issues that the way things are done in Australia. The guy from Manchester was an anaesthetic registrar, absolutely fantastic. And what you find when you're the intensive care unit consultant on is that the people who you are working with count 100% on the patient outcomes. And one of the things that used to annoy me intensely when I was doing my intensive care ward rounds was quite simply, we'd do a week at a time, and then I'd start my week, and the junior doctors would sort of quiz me on, well, we've now got to adapt to the way that you do the ward round and you run the intensive care unit. So this business of variability, the way doctors work, the way we interact, and the way we actually do our job, I believe is now the critical thing that has been totally missed in the healthcare agenda. Now, just quickly, I've put in, this is just a generic slide that I use. If I do mention anything about patient track, please accept that I've given the financial disclosure on that. I've got the patents and started that and inventor. I am going to show a graphic clinical slide. Brian, you'll be pleased to see I've taken out the nude pictures of myself for this presentation, but we've got some more interesting ones. And most of all, I'm really after feedback from the audience, because I've been asked to do the plenary at the Quality and Safety Forum in Paris, the second plenary the afternoon plenary on the first day, and I need to get the audience feedback on whether or not they think I'm on the right track, whether or not they think I'm crazy. So feedback is great. Next slide, please, Lisa. Okay, there's Tasmania. It's on the bottom of Australia. It's a little island about 300 or 400 miles south of Melbourne. You can see on by Bass Strait that I live up in Burnie, which is that's the main centre there, which services a population, very small population of about 150,000 on the northwest coast. It's summer over here, and I'm actually been on summer holidays. Next slide, Lisa. And I put that slide up just to really say that even though, I've done a lot of research and teaching, you've got to understand that my day-to-day job is that of a clinician. I work as a physician and also a critical care specialist. I also have a job where I coordinate the retrievals in Tasmania and also to the mainland for Tasmanian Ambulance. So every day I'm at the cutting face of dealing with patients. Let's have the next slide. And one of the things that I've done is to get out of the hospital, and I do my private consulting rooms actually in the general practitioner's room in the little town that I live in. And we took this picture of this patient who'd been recently in hospital, discharged from hospital, didn't know the name of the consultant, couldn't understand why the doctors in the hospital had changed her medications, and went into heart failure with the changes that had been made, and that's why the general practitioner there, Dr. Berryman, asked me to take a look at the patient. I've aged a bit more from that first slide, and I forgot to say with that first slide, with our teams and all the cultural differences, that I'm just about old enough to be father to most of those people in the original slide, and when we talk about how other quality and safety is great at looking at other industries and businesses, but there's almost generational considerations that we need to think about with our teams and clinical interface and healthcare. Let's have the next slide, please, Lisa. And one of the reasons why I'm in Paris is that I've been a patient big time myself, and they've really asked me predominantly to talk a lot about my own experiences. And look, I'm not going to dwell on that now, because really what I want to do for this, the talk in Paris, I'm going to spend probably about the first half of the plenary talking about my own experiences as a patient. So I'm not going to bore you all with that. But I've put up a brief summary of that, and even though I think we have a problem with doctors, all I can say about my exposure to the healthcare system in New Zealand and Australia, that on the whole I have had nothing but excellent care from the nurses and doctors who have looked after me. And what's often let things down a little bit has been system issues. And also I think I need to reiterate that no doctor or nurse goes to work with the intent of trying to kill a patient. And I'll talk about something that was just in the paper today here in the Melbourne papers about a journalist who died after visiting an emergency department in Melbourne. But I'll bring that up. But just really brief summary of the fact that I've been a patient big time, and to hear more of that, you really will need to turn up to Paris. Next slide, please, Lisa. And essentially, with all the issues I've had with my lung, I've actually been, despite my youthful good looks, I've really been left with pretty major long-term health issues in my chest, and you can see there in the right lung field I'm actually missing 6 ribs after a thoracoplasty. There's an associated scoliosis that has slowly been developing over the years. Don't worry too much about the large heart, that just relates to my athletic prowess as a middle distance runner in my youth and as a junior doctor. But also there's hyperinflation of the lung field on the right, where because of all the lung resection that I've had, I've developed a bit of emphysema there. Now, all of that occurred a very long time ago, about 25 years ago, when I was a medical registrar, and essentially a lesion about the size of a golf ball was missed on a chest X-ray by a radiologist. And if that tumour had been taken out at the time of that X-ray, I wouldn't have, my problems would not be as significant as what they are today. But moving along, next slide please, Lisa. The thing we've got to reflect on is, with the quality and safety agenda, is we've got to think about why it's not working. And I've written about this in the British Medical Journal last year. You can have a look at that. But anyway, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, I feel, has been spent. And my real gut feeling is that this money has not been spent examining what goes on in the clinical interface with the clinical teams and the way the clinical teams deliver care to the patients. And that's where the best bang for the buck is. I gave you an example that my junior doctors would forever say that, that the way the intensive care unit ran depended on which consultant was actually running the unit. Now, I knew that, and I was unit director, and to be honest, I never got around to saying, well, let's tackle this problem with variability. And variability in healthcare is a big, big problem. And I think if people want to reflect on Mid-Staffordshire, from what I've heard from even this part of the world, is that within Mid-Staffordshire, there was huge variability, and each and every one of us knows that in our wards and our doctors and our nurses, there's just that huge variability. We look at the merit study that was published in the Lancet. We in Australia thought that we could do a study where we could randomise hospitals because they were relatively homogeneous. What we found when we actually looked at the raw data, and no one did the preliminary work on that raw data, is that there was almost a 20-fold difference in endpoints like cardiac arrest incidents and unplanned admission to the intensive care units. So to my way of thinking as a clinician, and as 100% clinician, is that we haven't thought enough about the interface and the clinical stuff that's going on. The other thing that's of more concern to me, and I'm going to labour this in Paris with video footage of my medical students trying to talk to patients and trying to take a history. And also you've seen because in fact they can't do it. And no one actually teaches them how to take a basic history and how to think about that history. We just assume they can do it and that someone else teaches them. And the one thing that I get criticised a lot here in domestically for not doing enough, but what I am doing is I'm really focusing on that micromanagement of teaching students and junior doctors the very basics of clinical medicine, because I think that what's happening, and the quality and safety agenda might have made progress, because, and I'll be interested to know what people have to say and feedback on this, because I get a real feel that some of the junior doctors maybe is not as good as they could be, and our medical schools have a lot to answer for with that. Let's have the next slide, Lisa. So I've really laboured that point. Let's just move on to the next slide. And I've made my point there, and I think the next slide is a X-ray. If we can just have a look at that, please. Yeah, this is an X-ray of my son, who's one of my sons. I've got 6 kids. This guy's pretty naughty. If you've had a lot of children, you can certainly rate them like the tennis world rankings. And this guy is the naughtiest, and he gets up to all sorts of mischief. And despite telling him not to play with coins in his mouth, what does he do? Swallows a coin, and it gets stuck in his upper esophagus. Now, when I took him into the local emergency department, all I can say, again, is that I had nothing but outstanding care, considered opinion. and all the right decisions were made, and as it was, he actually passed that coin in the fullness of time. Let's have the next picture, please, Lisa. So just to really drill down to the micro detail of the blow-by-blow examples of what goes on. You know, we have this 40-year-old woman who has, let's have the next slide, who has bilateral reconstructions of her breasts after having, next slide please, Lisa. And have a look at this. You know, this is the nursing note. And do you know what? That's not that old, that nursing note. It's all in pen and paper. Some of it's difficult to read, some of it's scribbled out. But the bottom line was that the surgeons were quite concerned about this lady. It was actually quite difficult anastomoses to do the breast reconstructions. Intensive care was full. Usually these patients are booked to come to us. She didn't come because she was fit and they anticipated the operation would fall less than the 4-hour mark, and it went for 8 hours. But nevertheless, the surgeons spoke to the junior doctors, to the nursing staff, and left strict instructions that if she becomes hypotensive or oliguric, they want to know about it, and they left orders as to what should be done. And yet you can read here in the nurses' notes that just have a look about 3/4 of the way down, that she says the patient's blood pressure is 84 and 43 at 1 a.m. Dr. Page, bolus of fluid given by a phone order. And then the blood pressure drops again, and they increase the fluid even further. Let's go to the next slide, please, Lisa. So we then have the night doctor turning up at 4:30, bearing in mind that's 3.5 hours after the first drop in blood pressure, and he writes an excellent note, an excellent summary of the situation. And whenever I'm going back over disasters in our own healthcare system, it's always brilliantly documented, to Emily Bronte type of detail. And we can see here that the junior doctor writes a very good summary of the case, and let's have the next slide. And then, comes up with a reasonable management approach, and then discusses it with the medical registrar. Now, the question I have is that the surgical patient, the consultant plastic surgeons, who I know are, reasonable guys, why did the junior doctor not talk to the plastic surgeons or the plastic surgical registrar? And it's because the medical registrar is around and about in hospital on deck, and they can probably feel that the medical registrar is more approachable. So, anyway, we have the next slide, and we can see that by 6 o'clock in the morning that the nurse is still unhappy with the status of the patient. Next slide, please, Lisa. And we can see that pretty much the patient was hypotensive all night. Now, that patient, when the surgeons turned up in the morning to review her on the ward, called us immediately. She needed to be intubated, ventilated, resuscitated, had 4 trips back to theatre, 21 days in intensive care, and the whole thing turned into a medico-legal nightmare, but one that we couldn't defend. Let's have the next slide. So I've been asked by the British Journal of Hospital Medicine to write the more definitive article on challenging the James Reason view of the Swiss cheese model of care. Because to my mind, what goes on that causes adverse events and things that go wrong in hospitals is a cultural thing that is occurring at the bedside between the nurses, the junior doctors, the senior doctors, and a whole host of other players. And what you find, and I've been, certainly in Paris, we don't have time today, but certainly I'll be talking about when as a clinician I have found myself going round and round thinking about, how to solve a patient's problem. And it's amazing the old saying that if the doctors in the emergency department get it wrong, get the diagnosis wrong, it's very difficult to go back and think about the patient and to rethink things with a clean whiteboard. But yet we can train people to think like that. And I might as well talk about the case that was in the paper and the age, which I actually just stopped in a cafe driving up from Hobart back home, because that's where I've been on holiday. The Age, which is one of the eminent newspapers in Australia, the entertainment editor was 32 weeks pregnant and went to the the Royal Women's Hospital in Melbourne, complaining of abdominal pain, and was allegedly, and this is what's in the paper today, so I do not know the real story, but this is what was in the paper, was allegedly sent home with a diagnosis of musculoskeletal pain, and some hours after that was found deceased, and post-mortem revealed that she had actually been bleeding from a ruptured splenic artery aneurysm. Now, it's really interesting that there was a comment in the paper that the hospital had said that they couldn't really expect obstetricians to diagnose a splenic artery aneurysm. Well, maybe not, but in my opinion, why can't the doctor just diagnose that a patient is bleeding? And just, I don't know if some of you in Scotland might have seen my talk about my own case with that, where just failure to recognise the bleeding patient. So there's no doubt that probably that woman was in the emergency department. She was seen by competent people. They did think about it, but their minds would have gone round and around in a circle that, for whatever reason, they didn't even entertain the possibility of bleeding. Because if they'd even thought about it, I'd be amazed that in this day and age that you'd send someone like that home. So I'm fascinated by this fact that, and I'm going to get onto the research, but shortly, that really no one has thought about researching what actually goes on at the bedside and what goes on at the bedside, what goes on and how the way people think, and how that feeds back into misdiagnoses or failure to communicate the diagnosis. But let's have the next slide, Lisa. And this hasn't actually come out that well, this slide with the way it's been presented, and let's just go to the next slide, which I think listen, I won't talk to this, but actually I will now that it's up. Again, young woman sent home with a blood pressure of 85 systolic, complaining of abdominal pain, and because the clinical team were focusing on the fact that she was a febrile neutropenic and had recovered from that, they were satisfied with the blood pressure and gave no regard to the complaints of the abdominal pain. She went home, was collapsing on the toilet, represented to the emergency department, severely shocked and hypotensive, and essentially had ruptured her spleen due to the white cell colony stimulating factor that the patient had received. And once again, just this ability that we have as clinical teams to sometimes not appropriately listen to the patient and to think about what's going on. Let's have the next slide. And I think it's sad that this data hasn't been repeated. I think this is one of the few studies that this is the second paper that the Quality in Australian Healthcare authors published, which was their analysis of trying to understand why things do go wrong. And to be honest, we just need more of this. And as they say, or the editorial on this paper, I think from Charles Vincent, said that we need to understand this more. And it's amazing that if you look down on this slide in the deep blue, about the fourth or fifth item down at 10.9%, it's just basically lack of care or retention or failure to attend. And above that is that we have failure to request or arrange investigation, procedure or consultation. And next line up, failure to synthesise, decide and act on available information. If we take those three, and even if we take the misapplication of a rule, if we take or violation of a rule, if you add up those things which I've highlighted in blue, which are largely cognitive things, they account for about 40-50% of the causes of death and disability that were found in the Quality in Australian Healthcare study. And now, to my mind, this is where we should be focusing our research efforts, so we can design interventions that we can teach and tell people to think about these things. Next slide, please, Lisa. Now, I need to say something about research. I try to do research. I'm not always very successful at it, but I think there's been really good debate in the Lancet, led by that journal, and a series of papers talking about the vast waste of research that is done. And I think the quality and safety people need to have a good hard look at themselves, because I think that in Australia the typical way that things go with the quality and safety agenda is that they dole out small amounts of money for people to do quality assurance projects. And these are somehow reported, usually on posters at conferences. And you've got to ask the question that there are some very basic questions that need to be addressed, I believe, in the quality and safety agenda. And I think if we read this series from the Lancet, I think they need to be addressed in a systematic fashion, whereby only one or two really pertinent questions are asked, and the trials are done in a manner that answers the question. And I can, there's a couple of things that I want to address here. First of all, I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the work of the Australian-New Zealand Intensive Care Society Clinical Trials Group. Now, intensive care used to be a very big specialty based on just witchcraft and personal preference. Most studies in the critical care literature would be 100 or 200 participants, and based on these studies, and usually several of them, there'd be expert opinion as to what we should manage patients in different situations. And I don't have the time to go through all of that. But essentially about 15 years ago, the Australian-New Zealand Intensive Care Society said, look, this is just rubbish. We should be doing big studies where we have thousands of participants. We ask simple questions, and we do this in a rigorous manner so we can get clear answers. And 15 years on, a lot of things have been debunked. The whole business around fluid therapy, colloid therapy, the business of control of glycemic control in our patients have all been, a lot of work's been debunked through doing appropriate research. And I have to make comment about the current debate about stroke thrombolysis. And I don't know how much emphasis to put on this in Paris or even to mention it at all. But there are people saying, and there's meta-analysis to demonstrate, and there's been a recent pro-yes-no in the British Medical Journal, where really there have been a lot of negative studies done on stroke thrombolysis. And the studies that have been positive really only indicate a very small population of patients who are amenable to this within a very tight time frame. And it seems that the response from the community, from the research community, from the neurologists, is to just say, well, we've just got to make the studies better to prove the point. And how about the point might be that, in fact, thrombolysis for stroke is not such a great idea. And I can talk from significant experience in this whole business of the research agenda over the last 15 years with my own efforts in doing research on hypothermia post-cardiac arrest. Next slide, please, Lisa. Have you got the next slide there, Lisa? We'll skip that. We're running out of time anyway. Let's just, here we are cooling a patient down to 32 degrees. Next slide. We can see here that we've got an appropriate bradycardia. You can see that we've got a core temperature of 32.4. And next slide, and we published this data from about 4 hospitals in Melbourne, looking at 2 groups there, 43 patients, 34 patients in the New England Journal of Medicine, where we made a claim that, we can have significantly better outcomes with hypothermia. Now, as I've said, I haven't been on holiday, so I haven't been able to prepare this as well as what I would have wanted to. But a colleague, Nils Nikolaus from Sweden, and co-workers just published at the end of beginning of January, or e-publication in November, with a study looking at 900 patients across Northern Europe, showing that, in fact, there's no difference between 32 degrees and 36 degrees. And all of a sudden, we've changed practice. And I think getting back to the quality and safety agenda, it's interesting that we've now got these guidelines coming out in Australia for what one must do. And for the falls prevention guideline, they actually quote a piece of research that was published in the British Medical Journal, which is a randomised controlled trial from Sydney, which showed there was no benefit to a falls prevention program in a number of hospitals. So what we need in the quality and safety agenda is the clinical trials group approach, where we take on some very simple questions and we try to answer them in a really coherent way that really informs clinicians. And I think that practical step, because I hadn't said, the word on the street now with hypothermia is that it's out. You don't need to go to conferences. People have seen the data and people relate to how well that study was done from Sweden. The problem with the quality and safety agenda, I think, is that clinicians don't buy into it because the research is generally fairly suboptimal. I would recommend people read that series in the Lancet on research quality and research waste. And on the other hand, there's hundreds of millions of dollars and mainly they have a go at biomedical research, where there's hundreds of millions of dollars spent, billions spent on biomedical research, and little translation of that into healthcare policy and making things better for patients. Anyway, next slide. Next slide. I'll just say a little bit about technology. I really think that we don't use technology to address mission-critical solutions. And I am conflicted, but I reviewed a paper, a Vital Pack study, which is our main competition down in the south of England. And this paper was going to be rejected by the journal Resuscitation. And I said, no, hang on. I reviewed it and I thought what they did was, using an electronic system, they could see in the middle of the night that the nurses weren't doing the observations and that there were worse outcomes. And they could look at 1 million data points across the hospital to realise that. So I think we've got to use mega data to come up with conclusions around what is going on at the bedside. Are the observations being done? Are the doctors attending the patients in a timely fashion? And are they communicating all of that in a correct way? So our managers and CEOs and people above the level that I operate at have got no idea of what goes on at night. They've got no idea who's talking to who. And they only get interested in that when things go wrong. Let's have the next slide. And I do want to have a go about healthcare disaster investigations, because you guys have just had them in Staffordshire. Complicated area, and I could probably talk significantly on this, principally because my wife's a lawyer and I'm thinking about writing about it. But bottom line is that we don't have enough. When we have this disaster scenario, we revert to a legal analysis where the rules of evidence change to legal rules of evidence, and it seems to me it creates a scenario of hundreds of recommendations, most of which are never acted upon. However, if you did an analysis of all the major investigations from Bristol and Royal Infirmary forward, you'll see that there's a lot of commonality. And we've got to ask the question, well, why haven't these investigations changed anything? And I think that's a core fundamental question that really needs to be thought about, but I really don't have time to go there at the moment. So I'll move on, but we'll just park that one. I do want to talk a little bit about culture, because I've been trying to understand more about this. And one of the problems, if you think about that slide that we've got at the start, and I said there's a generational change. You know, I've been doing critical care for 25 years, and my registrars have been doing it for 1 or 2 years, and in some cases not even that. So unfortunately in medicine we revert to this command and control way of doing business, which the safety gurus say is really dumb. They're more in favour of the crew resource management. But so there's this conflict between how hierarchical systems versus hierarchical systems operate. And again, I don't quite know enough about this, but I'm very interested in this whole concept. And I think, Lisa, is the next slide the blank slide? Oh, I'm going to show you some video. I'm hoping I can see it too. Here it comes, which makes the point about communication. This is from Black Hawk Down. And it's about a minute of how they, this was a total disaster, this whole operation, but how they communicated just so well in a flatline way in a very stressful situation. But let's just have the video, please, Lisa. I've got no audio, but I'm hoping you folk do.
To secure until convoy arrives. Over. General, crowds in the hundreds now. Where they are, they can see things clearer than any of us. They know what they're asking. Let me talk to them. This is Garrison. I want to make sure that y'all understand what you're asking for, so say it out loud and clear. We're asking to go in and set up a perimeter until ground support arrives. And you realize that I cannot tell you when that might be. It could take quite a while. Roger that. You still want to go in there? Yes, sir. Well, yes, General. It's your call. Roger that. Govina, put him in.
We can stop that there now. But the point being, what I wanted to show with you with that was just how hierarchical. Military is a very hierarchical system, and yet within that, and it might have been difficult to pick up, but the general on the ground reverted to two other groups of people to get a decision. The decision was quickly analysed as a very risky decision, and as history went on to show, an actual, humiliating and fatal decision for the Rangers that did drop down to set up the perimeter. But the point was that it was all discussed, it was all done flat line, and that type of thing is very, very difficult to do in medicine, because the people that I'm dealing with in my clinical teams often don't have 25 years experience in the specialty. They don't understand a lot of the situations, and command and control is often the way that we do things in medicine, and yet the quality and safety agenda then preaches this hierarchical crew resource management way, and I think there's a lot that we can do with tight teams like emergency department resuscitation teams, operating theatre teams, but my team's different every day. So I think there's huge challenges in trying to understand that. Let's have the last slide, and I'm going to finish up because I really want people's comments. So I think, just to finish up, we can do this, but I think there needs to be massive generational change. One of the things I'm going to say in Paris is that I want managers to write no more policy and procedure for 12 months and to go and talk to junior doctors, go and talk to junior nurses. Our CEO didn't go. We had the first-year doctor orientation a couple of weeks ago before I went on leave. I was the most senior person that spoke to the first-year doctors starting in our organisation. Get involved with students. These people, if they see you being interested in them, when they become consultants and managers, they'll get involved with their students and doctors. I think that we don't think enough about the patients, and we don't listen to them nearly enough, and I'll be making that point in Paris big time. And at that point, I'd just like to finish and take any questions.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for such a thoughtful and wide-ranging talk. You've certainly stimulated a lot of chat. A lot of the participants were very supportive of your comments on the issues that we still face in terms of getting a response once we've identified a deteriorating patient. In particular, Tracy Gillis, who's one of the medical directors over at NHS Lothian, has chatted in the chat several times about the fact that we are increasing the recording of deteriorating patients, but still not nailing the response that's required. We have similar comments from John Kinsella, who's the chairman of the Scottish Intercollegiate Guidelines Network, who's also saying that we are now regularly charting, but he's still not seeing a reliable response to deteriorating patients.
Yeah.
Now, Mike, I'm going to hand over to Julie Hanna to ask just a question of, Julie is a Scottish Patient Safety Fellow. She's the latest cohort fellow. She's a resuscitation officer at Cross House Hospital, and she works in the resuscitation and clinical simulation department in the clinical improvement unit there. So, Julie, you have a question for Mike.
Thanks very much for this opportunity to ask the question. But I am currently a resuscitation officer with a background in critical care, and throughout my time in the NHS, I have had both successes and setbacks from trying to engage others, particularly different disciplines, in improving patient safety. It can often be a challenge, particularly when it's between different healthcare professionals, and I don't just mean medicine by that. And as a patient safety champion, sometimes we might have to work outside our own sort of professional group. And I really just wanted to ask, what advice do you have for those of us who are attempting to influence other people out with their own professional group, first of all? And then also, whilst I feel that it may be essential to hopefully have a collaborator or a champion within each professional group when you're trying to do improvement work, would it ever be possible or feasible ever to achieve success without having that sort of local champion?
Okay, that's great. Look, with the and I've got some great data on this, which is with the improvement that we had in medical emergency team responses and dropping off of our cardiac arrest incidents that I published a couple of times in the British Medical Journal in 2002 to 2007. Doing this change is really, really difficult, Julie. and you've only got so many resources. Now, what I believe is that a lot of people you're not going to change. And that's why I'm saying I think the quality and safety agenda needs to think that this is going to be a generational thing. So what we did is that I focused all of my efforts, bearing in mind I'm a full-time clinician and manager, so I focused my efforts on the first-year doctors and nurses when they start in the organisation, because that is when you have them captive. And if you can actually get them at the start and you keep re-engaging each year with the first-year people, what happens over 5 years, 3 or 4 years' time, is that those people aren't your first-year doctors, they are then your registrars, and they are your friends, and they understand, and you've got them culturalised. And then 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years down the line, they are then your consultants, and they will then be your champions. And one of the things I'm going to say in Paris is that we've got to stop thinking about trying to solve this problem as if we can solve it next year. If we can just find the magic bullet, think stroke thrombolysis. We as doctors are always thinking about magic bullets and drugs and wonder cures, whereas in fact changing this thing called culture in our hospital system, I believe fundamentally is a very difficult thing to do. But the people that you have the best chance of influencing and changing are your students, and you're investing in those people and investing in your first-year workers. So that's my answer to that, and then they will become your champions. And to be honest, I think the IHI, they've done a great job with this whole clinical fellowship thing. They've said, let's make the investment with people in the beginning of their careers, and I think that's great.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Mike. And that reference to the IHI Open School, certainly here in Scotland, a number, if not all of our boards are linking in with the IHI Open School. The SPSP Safety Fellowship programme that Julie is on is not for undergraduates, it's for folks in the early to middle parts of their careers. But again, those people are really getting energised by some of the areas that you're talking about, Mike. I'm just looking at some of the other questions here, Mike. Your comment around research certainly stimulated a comment from Martin Poulsen from Oslo in Norway, and also from some of our clinicians here in Scotland. And I guess one of the questions that Gareth Atkins, one of our programme managers here in Healthcare Improvement Scotland, has asked is, how do we bring together the quality improvement with the academic research? Any tips for us on that?
Look, I think I would be saying, look at the Canadian Clinical Trials Group. I would be saying, look at the Australian, New Zealand Intensive Care Clinical Trials Group. Look at the magnificent work they've done by saying, just imagine the power of all the people that are on this call. If we all decided to just maybe get together and just think about what is a fundamental question in the quality and safety agenda. I mean, you could even look at something simple like hand washing, falls prevention, and let's just say let's just take a really simple question to get started with. The ANZAC's Clinical Trials Group started off with, does dopamine improve? We used to give dopamine to prevent renal failure in patients who were hypotensive. They did a large randomised controlled trial that just showed it was just rubbish. Everything I'd learnt in physiology was not the case. So I would be saying getting parties together and forming the Quality and Safety European Quality and Safety Clinical Trials Group. And going about it in a manner that means that we can add the rigour so that you can publish the damn thing in the New England Journal of Medicine or the Lancet, and people then look at that group and say, yeah, these guys know what they're doing. We should be asking them to do more of this type of work.
Thanks very much, Mike. We're coming near the top of the hour, but just perhaps one final question around how do we get junior doctors and nurses given the opportunity to manage or lead in improving care? You've suggested that it needs organisational support from people like yourself. What other things might they need to get them more involved in the actual change?
Well, I believe that some of our biggest assets aren't used, and I think our medical students are a case in point. When you think about it, whenever I talk to the students about, well, actually I ask the students, would you have a baby in this hospital? Would you have a right hemicolectomy? This is our fifth-year students. Would you have a baby, right hemicolectomy, be a patient on the medical ward, and one other that I can't quite remember. I just did that just as a end-of-year thing. What do you guys think about the care in the organisation? The number of people that were staring down at their feet, not wanting to answer the question, was amazing. So medical students, nursing students, they're on the wards all the time looking at what goes on. Has everyone ever spoken to them? They're quite intelligent people when you talk to them about what is actually going on. So they can actually, I've always thought about, this is really weird, so I won't mention this in Paris, is that using those people as monitors. They are there all the time looking and seeing, recording observations and thinking about it. But we never, never, never ask them what they think about it all. And if I could say to all the people on this call, go out and have a chat to your students and just ask them, well, what do you really think about that? That does two things. It engages them with the thought process, and they know that you're taking an interest in what they think. And I think that's what's been missing. It's too often it's command and control, and we've got a command and control. It's how we change that to flat line and then change it back to command and control when we need it. And that's why I'm saying I think the whole thing's a generational thing, and it's going to take a generation to change it all.
Okay. Mike, thanks very much for that. Now we've come to the top of the hour. All of this call, all of the chat will be available. Lisa's going to send out the link to the recording of the call, so please reuse this. Mike, we've got all the chat. There's a lot of information in there, a lot of comment from many leaders across the system, from Roger Alcock, from Tracy Gillis, from Simon Watson, from Fidelma Fitzpatrick, from Republic of Ireland. You'll be very interested in all of that chat. But I think your key...
I haven't had time to look at it because I've just been busy.
That's okay. You've been busy sharing with us. So your key messages I got from this were go to the front line. So go to the Gemba, as Maureen Bisignano would say. You also highlighted the importance of the people on this call, the collective impact of what we could do by turning our attention to the areas that you've highlighted and doing that together. And you've finished with the highlight around using the students and the juniors and go out and have a chat. So I think that's a great message for us. Mike, I'd like to thank you for launching this QI Connect series for 2014. We all look forward to seeing you in Paris. You'll get big Scottish applause when you're there, so you're on the money. I'd like to just give a little call out for our next QI Connect. Our next QI Connect is, we're just finalising a date with Dr. Chuck Denham. Chuck Denham is one of the most influential clinicians in United States of America. He's the chairman of the Leapfrog Group. He has his own company in IT and innovations running out of the west coast of America. And Chuck is very keen to share what he's learned in his years in quality and safety, and we'll get back to you with the date for that. But it only falls to me to say thank you to Jennifer Graham, to Lisa Birch, and to the team at Healthcare Improvement Scotland for bringing us together, and to our first speaker, to Mike Buist, for setting us off on a great course. Thanks very much all. Bye just now.
Are you still there, Brian?
Thank you.